Hi everyone, Nigel Saunders here. It is a beautiful day out today, t-shirt weather near the end of October, very unusual. Welcome to part 2 of working on my Ta Prohm temple. I'll be planting the trees today, so I was very excited. I got up early this morning, did the paper route, and now it's time to plant trees. In part 1 of this series, I was working on the temple, getting it in the pot. I built a wooden base underneath the temple to support it. I positioned the temple and got it ready for planting. I also bare rooted one of the ficus trees I'll be using, and it had a good root system on it. So today I'll be planting it on the temple. Here is a look at the tree in its bucket of water. So I left it there overnight. Here is a look at the temple, so you can see the base I made for it to support it. With a root over temple planting or a root over rock planting, there's several methods used to attach the trees to the rock. Ideally, you want to position the tree so it sits there all by itself, arrange the roots, and it should be in a good position. If you do need to manipulate the roots, bringing them closer to the temple, what you don't want to use is wire. I've seen so many trees attached to rocks and they have all these marks on the trunk where it's either been wired or tied with raffia, and it leaves marks on the tree, and some trees, they just never really grow out. They're always there, these sort of rings around the tree. So that's something you don't want to do if you want your tree to look natural. So I'm going to try and position my tree, prune the roots so it sits on the temple without being tied down, and then I'll apply moss and soil around the roots to cover the roots up until they kind of mature and the tree's sitting in the pot all by itself. So that's the ideal situation. We'll see what happens with it. If you do tie your tree to the rock, I would recommend using something wide, like a strip of rubber or plastic, something that as the tree grows, it won't dig into the bark or the trunk. And on a ficus, it's quite critical because it takes a long time for wire marks to grow out on a ficus trunk because the bark is fairly smooth. I'm going to try putting the entire planting on my turntable. This will be a real test for the turntable. So I'll shift the pot over and get the turntable out. And then I've got to lift the temple on top of the turntable. I'll put this out front a bit more, like that. So here I go. Oh, it's heavy. It's heavy. It's very, very heavy. But I'll get it on. A little more square, like that. Yeah. Yeah, that's actually pretty good. Okay. It is on the turntable. I can rotate it around. That's awesome. That'll make the planting a lot easier. I'll get my tree out of the bucket of water now. Here it is. And I will position it. So I'm keeping all the roots on for the moment. Positioning the tree back here where it hugs the temple. Something like that is the intended position. So right away, there's a root here that's hitting on one of my sprites. So I'll need to reposition it. And it's kind of a horizontal root. So I want the roots to flow. On a ficus root over temple planting, you want your roots to flow because that is the beauty of ficus roots, is that beautiful flowing appearance, almost like a waterfall of roots. So I've positioned that root down. So now the tree really hugs the temple. You can see that. So now it's a matter of arranging all the roots and doing any root pruning if I need to. So again, I've got to get all these roots flowing down. So I'll get my root rake out and start positioning roots. Now there were some roots on the tree here sticking up, and I've got to decide if I want that. You don't have to use all the roots. You can see I have like hundreds of fine roots here. And on a, if you look at the reference photos, it's not like a solid mass of roots. You need some separation. So I'll have to pick and choose my roots, which ones I keep and which ones I prune away. So I'm looking at these roots here. You have to decide, does it look better with them or without? And I think without. I think they're just coming up and then across. So I'm going to root prune those away. All right, so here I go. So there's one sticking up here. It starts off vertical. Well, it continues vertically, so that comes off like that. And there's a series of roots here that a lot of them are vertical, so I will remove those. This one here too. So when you're putting soil around these roots, what you don't want to do is mound the soil up. You only want to put soil where you want the roots to grow. If you mound the soil up around here, the roots will grow up into the soil, and that's not what you want. That's not what I want anyway. So there's some more vertical roots here I can prune away. These ones are flowing quite well. This one is sticking a bit too horizontal, so that one comes off. There's one here that's, well, that one's okay, I guess. This one, I think that one's acceptable. It can be positioned. The one behind it also. There's one here that comes from, where does this one come from? It comes from in here. I don't think I need that one. So that one comes out. There's one sticking up here I can take off. This one, even though it's not a bad root, it's not a radial direction, and it's kind of starts straight up, so that one's going to come off also. I've got too many roots growing from here, so I'm going to take this one off. Keeping my flowing roots, not my roots that start off a funny direction. Again, you want them all flowing. And if you're worried about your roots drying out, you just get your spray bottle and just, give them a spray, and that'll keep them hydrated. Take your time with roots. So to get the tree closer to the temple here, into the corner, I would need to do some more root pruning. I'm just looking for what is stopping me getting it closer. I think it's the remains of this thick root here. So I can get it there, which isn't really, really close to the temple. I can't really, if I prune that part off, I'm losing a lot of roots, these new roots. I don't think I want to do that. So that might be as close to the temple as I can get the tree, which is pretty good. I mean, it's not bad. I'm not complaining. Okay. So let's keep going around here to this side here and see what I can do. So you can see I have some big aerial roots here. And again, you want them flowing. And this one, so this one, it doesn't start off in a radial direction. Here's the radial direction, and it's cranked right over here. Now, I can do some repositioning, but it always emerges on a funny angle, so it has to be removed. So I will come in and take that root right off, like that. Then I have this one hanging out. It comes out horizontally, and again, it doesn't really flow. It's horizontal. Same with the one coming out the front here. So I'm thinking all those aerial roots that aren't flowing down will need to be removed. I can bend them down to a degree, but they still never run alongside the trunk and they don't flow, so they have to come off. So I'm going to take them off. It's unfortunate. I'll keep the fine ones if I can, but these big roots have to come off. And it'll leave a bit of a scar there, but it's better to have a scar that will eventually heal than these ugly roots sticking out in midair. So there's one of them off, and I'll clean those cuts up. Here comes number 2. Like that. So that one's gone, and I have some fine ones that I could arrange down, which are okay. At least this one's a good one. I'm not so sure about these ones. I'll leave them on, clean up the cut, and then see how it looks. Now the chances are, because I remove those roots, I will get more aerial roots forming in this area. Generally on a ficus, when you interrupt the sap flow to the branches, that it generates more roots in that area. Okay, that's getting close. That will heal over quite nicely. Now, there's a root on the inside here. You can see that's the one I bent down. I don't think it's very graceful. That one's going to come off also. So off it comes. Beautiful. Okay, so that's got that. So on top here, I also have some vertical roots sticking straight up that I'll prune away. And one that goes a funny direction here needs to be pruned away. And there's some sticking straight up here that have to come off. Even that one's not very good. It comes vertically, so that's got to come off also. Nice roots, just the wrong location. Now, this big one coming out the front here, this one, I think that's acceptable. It's not too bad. These ones, they kind of come from the inside, and again, I don't think they flow very well, so I'm going to take this one off also. Always looking for flow. Like a waterfall or a melted candle. Okay. Well, this is looking good. I think I'm getting close. Here's a look at the progress so far. So I have some aerial roots coming off the tree here, and these ones actually flow quite nicely. They flow downwards, so those can be used. There's one on the inside here I can prune away. Like that. And one here.
and I think that's good. I think they can all be arranged quite nicely. Yeah. Okay. Let's go around the back again. Oh, don't tip over tree. Let's just have another look. All is looking good here. I think this one, it's kind of coming from the inside. I've got to take that one off also. Nice root. Just doesn't flow very well. In fact, I think these ones are okay. I debated whether I should just take that piece off. But it's around the back and it contributes to gripping the temple. I think it'll look good. Now, can I arrange this tree any better? I'll just prune away these roots on the inside here. Like that. Yeah, that's a pretty good position in there. That's a very good position. Okay, I think all is looking good. So now I need to attach the tree to the temple. And I talked about all the different techniques. So I've got to decide what I'm going to do. It almost stays here by itself. It just needs something holding it at the top, that's all. And maybe I think the soil will hold it at the bottom fine. So I just need like a tie at the top, and that will hold the tree in place. And this will be going into the plant room, and I'll put it under the grow light. The tree's being kept cool, so it'll, start growing right away. It'll be like spring for it. So it should recover very quickly and grow like crazy. Yeah, so I think everything's in place. I just need to tie it at the top here. I've got some raffia that I can use to tie the tree on. Now raffia, it will dig in, so you have to be really careful. I mean, it's like wire. It's just maybe a little more biodegradable. So I will use that. I'll just keep an eye on the tree. I'll be very careful with it that it doesn't dig in, and it'll only be on a branch up here. So there's the tree positioned in the pot. The roots are combed out, flowing roots. I've got the tree as close to the temple as I can get it, right there. And then I'll use my raffia and I'll tie it to the top of the temple here. Okay, so that's tied on. Is it in the right position? No. Tighten that knot. Okay, how is that looking? I'm going to step back and have a look at it. So there's the front of the planting. I think it's looking good. I'm happy with it. On this side of the planting, I'll only have the one tree, so I can start filling in the pot with soil, arranging my roots that are reaching to the soil, and then start building it up to cover up these roots. So I'll get my soil out and start filling this in. So any roots that reach down into the soil, I want to arrange, because once they hit the soil, they'll thicken up, and that'll be, their position. Okay, so there's a couple here. One is an aerial root. I'll position it off here. The other one comes here. I'll put that kind of in front of the temple like that. So I can fill in this space with soil now. have to work that soil in underneath the temple here. Okay, let's go around the back now and do the same. Get rid of all this trimmings here and yeah, arrange these roots coming down here. Combing out the tangles. These roots, you can see the wood here, and the roots will grow really well on top of the wood. Now I will have a layer of moss and soil on top of the wood, but yeah, roots, the wood stays moist and the roots really like growing against this spruce. I found that with many plantings, if they're in wooden boxes, the roots just love gripping the wood and growing on the wood. So it's no problem that the wood is fairly high here. Okay, so the soil is in on the tree. The next step is to apply my moss and muck up on the top of the roots to keep them covered until they kind of mature enough that they'll stay in place and continue to grow down into the pot. I've got my pot of moss here. So most of this moss, because it's growing like on sidewalks and that, it has a layer of fine kind of silt that it grows on, and makes a really good, it's almost like well, it's like muck, and it's really good. You can position it and it seems to, you know, stay in place. It holds the roots in place. It does everything you want it to do. So I'll start applying it around the roots now. And I think I'll give this soil a water before I continue. So here I go with the water. And you can put the moss on top of moss, so you can build up layers, and that's what I'll be doing. So again, you want to keep this layer as thin as you can, because the roots will grow into it, and you don't want roots sticking out in midair. You want them, you know, fairly tight to the temple. And I may find that the roots will grow along the temple anyway, because the cement holds moisture in. So I may get natural roots that follow along the contours of the temple. That's the ideal situation. And then, you know, any roots hanging out in the air you can then remove. So I've used this technique on my root over rock thuja plantings, and it worked really, really well. A thin layer of moss, and the roots just grew within that moss layer, and it turned out really nice. The roots are maturing now and looking good. And it'll be critical that I mist this really well to keep these roots healthy. So this one I can kind of arrange on top of this ledge here. And you can always wrap all this with, you know, plastic to keep humidity in if you don't have like a greenhouse or a humid plant room. That works just as well. Wrap it in clear plastic, or even, you know, it can be white plastic, whatever. You do have to watch, if you use clear plastic, that it doesn't heat up too much in the sun. You've got to kind of keep it out of the direct sun. So to support this moss going up the wall here, I'll need to build it up so it climbs up the wall. And you could use sphagnum moss even. It doesn't really matter. I just like this moss because it has that muck kind of layer on the back of it, and it kind of, well, it makes it a little easier holding it in position. So you can see how I'm building up a thin layer against the temple, and that's what the roots will grow into. So here's a root hanging out in midair, so I'm going to try and bend that down. If I can keep my moss in place here, like that. So that's what you want. You want your roots to follow the contours of the temple. That's why I use a thin layer here and not build it up with a great big thick layer of soil, because the roots will grow out in midair, not against the temple. And it's the same with root over rock. You want the same thing. It's no different. This is basically a root over rock planting, even though the rock is a temple. Okay, I am getting low on moss, so I'm going to need to go collect some more. And I have a place where there's just tons of moss growing. I have the sidewalk out front, and I have another location. I think I've mentioned it before. Check around your arenas, because the arenas kept cold and you get a lot of condensation on the buildings, and moss seems to grow around the base of arenas really, really well. So you can see that root is covered up now. So it'll continue to grow alongside the temple down into the soil here.
This type of work, creating these moss walls and positioning all the roots, is very meticulous work, but in the end the result is worth it. You get all those roots clinging to either your rock or your temple, and eventually you remove this moss, or it just washes away, and it should look fantastic in the end. So I'm going to go out now and collect more moss. I'll need a lot of moss for this planting, because I'll have other trees, smaller trees, positioned on the other side of the temple. So there'll be more root work coming, more tree planting, and more mossing coming up. I've placed a plastic bag around the root system to keep the moisture in while I'm out collecting moss, because you never know how long you'll be. You might run into someone you know and start talking. So it's better to protect them like this, so when you come back they're not dried out. I have collected a big bag of moss here. So there's a look at it. And I'll water it just to hydrate it all. And I'll let it soak for a bit and then come back and resume the work on the temple. All right, it's back to work on the temple. So I'll remove my plastic. That kept the roots nicely hydrated. You can see they're all still wet after about an hour. All right, here we go. My moss has been soaking, so it's nice and flexible. So I will continue building up the moss around the roots. Now, up here, I'm just going to make sure my roots are combed out. Start applying the moss up here. So luckily this temple has lots of steps where you can apply the moss and it stays in place because of the taper of the temple. If you had like an unusual shaped rock or something, it'd be a little more difficult. But you can always wrap it in plastic or something. What you don't want to do, as I've said, is, you don't want to bury it in a big pot of soil, because the roots are just going to grow out into the soil and they won't grow around the rock. And I'll put some moss up here. Start building it up around this area. So all this moss is temporary. Once the roots grow down into the soil and start maturing, this moss can be removed. You don't have to remove all of it, but it's just to guide the roots into the soil. It's not to stay on the temple permanently. So these aerial roots should grow down into this moss and eventually cover that surface of the building. I don't think there's any roots that are really exposed anymore, like fine ones. These ones are fine in the air. They'll continue growing. The tips are in this moss.
So I think I'm going to call tree number 1 planted. There's an overall look at the moss walls and the tree planted. So next I've got to get out my other 2 Natal ficuses that I intend on planting on the temple. So let's get those out now.